Hi, my name is Valerie Leonard. I am the founder of nonprofit Utopia. I want to welcome you to today's forum. We're going to talk about ways that we can use data to demonstrate impact. So that could be demonstrating impact for our own performance, or most importantly, demonstrating impact of problems if we don't, in fact, address them. I'm going to be sharing with you some examples from my own work in my community and with clients as well. And before we get started, I just want to remind you, please, if you have any questions, any comments, to post them in the chat room. And also let us know who you are, where you're from, any issues that you have with big data, any accomplishments that you've made. We'd love to hear what you're doing and share some of your lessons as well. So without further ado, I am going to share my screen and pull up the presentation. All right, again, we're going to be talking about how we can use data to demonstrate impact. All right, a little bit about Nonprofit Utopia. We're the ideal community for emerging nonprofit leaders. We have shared our space, provided a safe space for emerging leaders to talk about the things that are important to them and some of the issues that they're having developing their own organizations. We would love for you to join at nonprofitutopia.mn.co. Our mission is to develop the next generation of ethical nonprofit leaders, and we do this by providing ongoing professional development, and we also provide coaching, consulting, as well as an online community. So again, we want to make sure that we can cross-pollinate and have our more seasoned professionals share some of their expertise with the younger generation, and likewise have our younger members share some of their experiences and expertise. And our vision is to strengthen the global nonprofit sector by providing training and development opportunities for up to 50,000 people between now and 2033. And a little bit about me. I am the founder of Nonprofit Utopia. I have significant experience running organizations in consulting and coaching. I'm also on staff at Roosevelt University teaching teaching business courses, and on staff at UIC teaching courses in nonprofit management. I'm most proud of the fact that I've helped over 750 people to meet their goals and objectives to date, and helping to raise over $100 million through technical assistance and grant writing. All right, so without further ado, I'm going to share with you some examples from education. And this is from my work with community in North Lawndale, as well as other West Side communities, such as West Humboldt Park and Austin and East and West Garfield. We were very, very active, and I'll say, they're still very active, but I was most active between 2007 and 2013. We noticed that there were significant disparities in not only the quality of education between communities on the West Side, which were primarily Black and Latino, and the treatment given folks in more affluent communities. We noticed that there were differences in the quality of education, the way that our children are treated, and all of that good stuff. So we used the data to help us raise the issue. We identified the issue, we quantified the issue, and then once we knew what we were dealing with, we were actually able to successfully advocate on behalf of our kids in the community, kids and parents. Alrighty, so without further ado, here we go with education. We did a 3-part town hall on education called School Pictures. And one of the things that we wanted to share was, just a highlight of what was going on, give a snapshot of what was going on the West Side as it relates to education, as it relates to, I guess, the school to prison pipeline and all of that stuff. All right, so here's a slide from that particular town hall meeting. And what we noticed was that nearly 17% of Chicago public schools are on the west side. However, 52% of Teach for America placements were on the west side, and about 60% of that placement was in charter schools. All right, so if you notice the areas that are highlighted, those are west side communities. So we were able to use those raw data that were given out by Chicago Public Schools, and mind you, it wasn't in this neat form, right? But we pulled data from their Excel spreadsheet and we sorted it, and we were able to come to this conclusion. So what is telling, and why this is an issue is Teach for America is considered a high quality offering, by the I would say the Obama administration actually made sure that that happened. But many of the teachers are, they're new to education. They might be career changers and they have significantly less experience. And when you look at what's going on Chicago's west side, the last thing we need is inexperienced teachers. We need to have teachers who are familiar with the community, people who are experienced to deal with some of the problems, many, many problems that our children are facing. So that was an issue. We also looked at the reading results, and this was back in 2013. We used the actual CPS data to get a snapshot of what was going on. All right. And we used the reading scores as an indicator of health, so to speak. So we looked at the number of schools that were in North Lawndale, right? We looked at the number that at that time were traditionally public schools, charter schools, contract schools, and schools that were operated by AUSL. And for those of you who are not from Chicago, AUSL is an operator. They have a contract to actually manage public schools. They come in and fire all the staff and replace them with their own staff in hopes of the schools actually turning around. So this has been going on, for quite some time. I don't think they've done it in about 5 or 6 years. It actually became very, very controversial. But, at any rate, they were given extra resources and also had their own management team. So when we compared the scores, we looked at the number of schools that had kids that were performing at or above city averages, the numbers who were doing at or above West Side averages, and then we looked at the number that were below the city and West Side averages. So when we looked at the public schools, we noticed that there were 94 public schools, there were 11 charter schools, 1 contract school, and 6 AUSL schools for a total of 112 schools. So when we look at the performance, we see that there were 30, so about a third, 30 of all of the public schools were performing at or above average. And then we noticed that 12 were at or above West Side averages, and 52 out of 94 were performing below West Side averages and below city averages. And, we did that analysis across the board here. So these are all the raw data, and raw data is just the absolute numbers. So we were able to get a really good sense for what was going on at a glance with our schools. And we were also able to tell how each segment was performing. So 32 of the West Side's 112 elementary schools performed as well or better. So looking across the board, 32 out of 112 did as well or better. So when we look at the same results, but we express them in percentages, that gives us an even more powerful story, right? So the number of public schools that were performing at or above city averages, and this is for West Side schools. So we're looking at West Side communities like North Lawndale, East and West Garfield, Humboldt Park, so the schools in on the West Side, right? So a third of the public schools, traditional schools, were performing at or above city averages, 18% of the charter schools. And remember, at that time, charter schools were being sold as a superior alternative to regular public schools. And then none of the contract schools were doing as well or better, and none of the privately run AUSL schools. So they were not charter, but remember they were under contract. None of their schools were doing at or above average. And then when we look at the schools that were doing at or above West Side averages, we found that 13% of the public schools were doing at or above West Side, and then 27% for the charters. So the charters tended to do a little bit better as a group for the West Side averages in terms of, above West Side averages. And AUSL was 17%. And then when we look at the number or the percentage of students who were performing below averages for the city as well as for the West Side, we see that more than half of the traditional public schools were performing below the city and the West Side averages. But at the same time, 55% of charters. So that really debunked the myth that charters actually perform better. They're subject to the same conditions as every other school. And then here's a number that's really, really telling. The contract schools, we only had one, and that was doing below city averages and the community average. And then AUSL schools, 83%. In spite of all the extra resources, 83% were doing below the West Side averages. So it's really important to use the data to be able to understand a community, to be able to quantify issues, and then you can prioritize, which issue are you going to address today? There are many, many fights, and you have to choose your fights very carefully. So when we went and looked at the high schools for the ACT scores, there are 38 high schools on the Chicago's West Side, at least at the time this was done. Again, this was done back in 2013. And the average ACT score for the West Side students was 16.4. And you compare that to the city, the average score was 17.8. And the average ACT reading score statewide was 20.8. So you can see that Chicago schools, whether they were on the West Side or citywide, as a group, tended to perform below the state average in terms of the ACT scores. And then when we look at the trends in the ACT reading scores, the blue is for Chicago West Side averages, and the red is for the city averages. So you can see that, they both are moving in the same direction, but generally speaking, the West Side ACT scores were lower than citywide. And then surprisingly, when we look at the graduation rates for the state of Illinois, 83% were graduating. within 5 years. For the city of Chicago, 64%, and for the West Side, 66%. So we noticed that the West Side schools were actually outperforming the city of Chicago schools by about two percentage points. However, that number bears going a little bit deeper. We need to understand why the rate, if our ACT scores are lower, right? And you look at the reading scores being relatively lower, why do West Side schools have a higher graduation rate? Is it because somehow they have made up for lost time? Is it because there are social promotions? Is it because people were pushed out? So you're just really focusing on what was left? So those are some questions that we needed to dig deeper. And quite frankly, that was about 7 years ago. And if we did dig deeper, I'm not quite sure what we found. But those are questions that one would need to ask when they see patterns of data that are unexpected. All right. So when we look at the economic impact of dropping out, so not only are you looking at numeric data, you're also looking at some of the research that was done, by others. So the economic impact of dropping out of high school, according to Robert Wise, he found that it was very steep. About 17,000 public school students didn't graduate with their class in 2007. And the lost lifetime earnings in Chicago for this class of dropouts, $4.5 billion in lost income to a group of people just because they did not complete high school. Each class of dropouts from the Chicago Public School District would save the city more than $280 million in reduced health care costs over the course of their lifetimes. So apparently there's a relationship between educational attainment and healthcare status. So he's saying that if you look at the healthcare status and the associated costs of taking care of people who tend to be more sick, there's a difference of $280 million just for this group of people who dropped out. So it's really, really important as you look at your causes and effects for whatever issues and programs you're developing, you need to understand the consequences of not taking action. So in this case, the consequence of not taking the action of graduating on the on behalf of the students is actually costing the city over their remaining lifetime $280 million. So if 1,000 additional Chicago students were to graduate, it's estimated that they would earn approximately $20 million in increased income a year based on the median annual income level by education. So clearly, education makes a difference. And what we found, from looking at Chicago public school data is between 2009 and 2010, 11,225 youth were arrested on school property and they were referred to juvenile court. So we're moving directly from the education to now looking at some of the public safety issues as it relates to our kids. And of this number, 2,751 or 25% were from the west side of Chicago. And the Chicago Tribune once described the Cook County Juvenile Temporary Detention Center as a warehouse for kids. All right. And when we look at the juvenile arrests, we found that citywide in 2009, there were 5,651 juvenile arrests. And then in 2010, that number had gone down to 5,574. So what you have here is these are the police districts for all of the West Side police districts. And these are the numbers of juvenile arrests that were made in the schools in their district. So as you can see, the West Side accounted for both years about one fourth of every juvenile arrest in the city of Chicago. And then this chart here gives us a list of all of the different types of arrests, right? What is it that they were arrested for? Was it drug abuse? Was it simple battery? All right. So the top two offenses were drug abuse violation and simple battery. And the offenses with the largest increases between 2003 and 2008 were robbery, miscellaneous non-index offenses, vandalism, and warrant arrest. Now, it would be really interesting to see how this looks today because crime has indeed increased over the past year or so. The offenses with the greatest decreases are drug abuse violations, simple battery, and motor vehicle theft. Even though they're decreases, they still make up a larger percentage of all the crime. So what does that tell us, right? Once we looked at what was going on from a public safety perspective, as it relates to our youth, there needs to be alternative to detention in juvenile court in communities like North Lawndale. The vast majority of the detainees in juvenile detention come from the West Side, and a large percentage is from North Lawndale. So we need community-based projects focused on diverting court cases. Why? Because they have a better potential to decrease youth involvement in the juvenile justice system. But once you divert them, you need to make sure that they're engaged in activities that will deter them from crime. So activities like leadership development, civic engagement, helping people to really understand how our government works, job training, getting jobs, tutoring, helping them to actually do well. So you can't just divert them. You need to divert them to positive alternatives that will actually keep them from offending again. And here is an example of one of my clients demonstrating impact. They are working to do expungement and also working to streamline court processes that create a backlog for the expungement process. And the reason why expungement is important, and let me go back and tell you, expungement is basically you could seal a court record, and when I say a court record of an offense, or you can expunge it from the record, meaning it's not on your record. And if you expunge the records of ex-offenders, it helps them to get meaningful employment, right? So they were really, and they remain really keen on streamlining the process. All right. So, and this was their impact just 3 months out the gate. They've been doing this for about 3 years now, so I can imagine their numbers are much more impressive. And I thought that this was impressive for 3 months. They have 12 operating partners. They had 60 recruits attending Rap Sheet Day. And these are people who were formerly incarcerated, and they're looking at ways to expunge their records. And of those 60, 24 participated in legal Q&A sessions, and 31 had their expungement and or sealing petitions prepared, and 5 elected officials were engaged. And at that point, one neighborhood courtroom was committed for Pullman. And I believe that they have more neighborhood courts committed right now. So I think this is a wonderful example of describing your impact. They say a picture is worth 1,000 words. And I think they describe their impact very clearly. And again, this was just for 3 months, not for the whole year. And it's also very, very difficult to move our court system. So, given that, they have done a remarkable job. And so, in this case, I'm going to show you a couple marketing examples, and these are from, my own experience running the nonprofit Utopia community. We have 46 members at the time. This was at the end of the year. We have more members now, but we had 46 members from 6 states and from 3 countries. And we raised $2.3 million for our clients through technical assistance and proposal writing. We prepared 15 assessments for organizations, and those assessments actually put them in the position where they could do a strategic plan, they could do fundraising, and they actually were able to raise this 2.3 million as a direct relationship to us helping them prepare organizational assessments. We did 64 videos. We reached 14,474 people just through those videos. We had 140 podcast episodes, and that's a cumulative figure. And over 24,000 people had watched those videos. When we look at the geographic reach of our podcast, we reached 93 countries. When we looked at the data for our podcast and saw, who was listening and where. All right, so those are just some examples of how you can use data to not only demonstrate impact for your organization, but you can use the data to demonstrate positive and negative impacts to communities, help you tell a story, help you address issues. All right. So at this point, I'm going to stop sharing and then answer some questions. But before I do that, I want to remind you that if you have any questions afterwards, you can email me at ValerieFLeonard@msn.com or ValerieFLeonard@nonprofitutopia.com. Either way, it'll get to me. And if you are a member of the Nonprofit Utopia community, feel free to continue this conversation. I'm going to post this video in our community, and I want to hear what your thoughts are, what your experiences have been. All right. And if you want to join Nonprofit Utopia, feel free to do so. You can join us at nonprofitutopia.mn.co. Be sure to follow us on YouTube, Facebook, and Twitter. All right. So if you have any questions, please feel free to share those questions. I'm going to check out our chat room. All right. So I see we do have comments. Okay, and if you can bear with me. All right, so the comments. Thank you, Cy, for telling Danielle Richards and Joseph Williams about this. Okay, thank you. Okay, Linda, that's a excellent question. How do you source the data? It depends. I can tell you, I guess just a moment. Yeah, it depends on what project you're working on. When we were working on the projects for, and when I say projects, I'm talking about advocacy. We did some serious advocacy around education in public schools. I was involved in it from about 2003 until about 2013. That's when I was most active. But we sourced the data. We went to the CPS website and we collected data there. There were they had data on school performance, so you could download spreadsheets, and if you're patient, you can wade through the Excel data. They had Excel data on reading scores, math scores, graduation rates, dropout rates. They had data on, I believe, truancy, and we downloaded those data and analyzed them to get, the information that you saw there. When it comes to, data for, um, the things that you do, obviously you're going to collect those data. If you want to share your impact, talk about the number of people you serve. So you'll collect data on the number of people that you've served. You'll collect data on your accomplishments, and it helps if you can kind of put it in a picture format, so that people might be more engaged. But from time to time, you'll also need those data to include in the proposal that you're writing. So, Linda, let me know if I answered your question. Um, Again, it's going to depend on what your topic is, where you find the data. A good place to find data, regardless of what you're working on, is the Census Bureau. 9 times out of 10, when you're going to work on any project that impacts the community, you're going to want to know who's there. You want to have descriptor characteristics to indicate who's there, how many people are there, what their age and education attainment. And if you have any specific questions or about a specific project, I can, I can put my head together with you and we can figure something out. Okay. That's a good question. So, for instance, how can you figure out if those in the juvenile justice system are there because of food insecurity, learning disability, or other reasons? You know who a good resource for that is Miriam Kaba, because she's the one that I got my data from. Miriam Kaba is a foremost expert on juvenile, she's working with gang involved youth, and she has her finger on the pulse of Chicago data, even though she has moved back to New York. So not only does she have the data on these juvenile arrests, but she has relationships with the youth, with their families, so that she can get behind the numbers and really understand what their issues are. And I would not be surprised if somehow food insecurity and poverty are strongly related to some of these crimes that we're having. All right, Side. Lewis, it's always my pleasure. Both Danny and Joe are both engaged advocates. All right, thank you so much for sharing that. Um, okay. Please follow Nonprofit Utopia on Facebook. I thank you so much for that. And then Linda says, yes, but some things are harder to find, like the underlying causes of the outcomes. Yeah, the only way you're going to find the underlying causes is to actually talk to the people who have those problems. All the government entities can do is collect statistics. And if they don't have someone who's actually talking to people, getting behind the numbers, we'll just get numbers. So I think you're very, very correct there. So yeah, you might talk to someone from Voice, the Voices of Youth in Chicago. I know they did a study to talk with some of the youth who were involved. These were high risk youth who are involved in the juvenile detention system or had a high risk of being involved. And they actually talked to them and got a sense for what their attitudes were. And this is really important because this is youth doing research with other youth who could get the information. So you're going to actually have to be able to get access to people who have those problems and talk to them, and that becomes your original data. All right. Are there any questions before we go? Any comments before we go? All right. No questions, no comments? Let me I thank you, Joseph. I really appreciate the comment. All right. Are there any questions? Is there anyone who wants to share some of their experiences collecting data or using data to actually demonstrate an issue, advocate for people, and demonstrating impact? Sai, I know you've done a lot of that work because you have been a champion for the parks. So if you can share, how you got your data, that would be great. And good morning, Sheila. Thank you so much. Thank you, thank you, thank you. You're welcome. You're welcome, Linda. Thank you so much. And if there's any way that I can help you, we can put our heads together. If there's a specific project you're working on and you're a member of the community, so feel free to, continue our conversation in the community. And this is from Leslie. Thank you, Leslie. And Leslie is another one of our members. She says, good fundamental data analysis based and presented on the tangible case studies which we observe and experience in Chicago with which we can identify. Yes, yes, yes. Okay. All right. Yeah, I was just repeating some of the other comments. All righty. So it doesn't look like we have any more comments or questions. Again, if you need to contact me, you can either post later on this Facebook page or in YouTube, or you can email me at ValerieFLeonard@nonprofitutopia.com. And we would love it if you can join us. We're at nonprofitutopia.mn.co. For those of you who are interested in joining, we have a number of resources that you can tap into. And the greatest resource is people. All righty. So thanks again, guys. And I shall talk to you later. Take care. Bye-bye.